My name is David Fear. I'm the chief film critic for Rolling Stone. It is an honor. Please help me bring to the stage Andrew Scott.
Hello.
Right? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to guess that you knew of Andrew Haigh's work before this. When this script came across your radar, what was your first impression of it? Or to put it another way, exactly how much water weight did you lose through your eyes as you started kind of reading Adam's journey on the page?
Well, that's so true. It's so true. That's exactly what the experience was. It's like it just knocked me out. It really did. It's quite a. Excuse me. It was quite an extraordinary read because there's a lot of sequences in it where there's a huge amount of dialogue, but where the dialogue did come in, it was just stuff that I really connected with and recognized. I thought was incredibly sort of cinematic, sort of vulnerable, beautiful character, and all the music was woven into the script. It's that beautiful song, and the very last line of the script was "Make love your goal." That's good.
Let's hear it. You know, it's funny. I've seen this film a few times now, and I was talking to somebody about you and Paul Mescal, but your performance in particular, and they said, "Well, you know, he played Hamlet, right?" And I went, "But the Shakespeare, huge bard contingent here."
I wouldn't say huge, but.
And they said, "You know, he played Hamlet," and I was like, "This role's harder." I guarantee you, to me, this role seems like it would be harder to play because he seems like such a tough nut to crack. He seems very repressed at first, and yet you also have to be vulnerable, and you have to kind of chart him as he's going through this experience that you never quite know where he's at or what's real or what feels real.
Yeah.
What were the early discussions between you and Andrew like about Adam? And I'm wondering if there was something that kind of helped you unlock him, like a key.
There's a couple of things really, you know, sometimes I get a little bit wary of crying, you know, and like, I always think people's attempt to not cry is much more moving, but then this is a guy who hasn't been touched by his family or by a lover or anybody in a long time, very lonely kind of character, so there's a huge amount of sort of catharsis, physical catharsis that happens for him, and so I think there's a huge amount of release that happens for him in so many different ways, and that was really interesting to me, you know, so that the idea of actually just crying a little bit in this one, I don't know, I felt like it's okay to do it in places if it's not too front and center. But the thing that I found probably the most interesting, the thing that I wanted to bring to it, because the screenplay was so sort of extraordinary, was a sense of physicality. I'm not sure that necessarily would read as a particularly physical part, but just the idea of going back into childishness and the sensuality of children and their parents, you know, kind of ownership of our parents' bodies in some ways, and getting into their bed and touching them, and just how much he would have missed that and wanted to get that back, and the sort of duality with that, alongside the physicality of the more adult stuff, where he's falling in love and having sex and stuff for the first time in many years. It felt to me very physical.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the part about, you know, because this is somebody who hasn't been touched in a while, because when you watch Adam have any sort of physical contact really with anybody on screen, it's almost like you can see this small electric voltage going through him.
Yeah.
This incredible sense of like need and exhilaration and desire, and you know, he's striving for a connection, and when you see him with his parents, he finally gets that physical connection that he never got before.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things, you know, it's like, how do you communicate? If somebody were to say to you, like, act like you've never been touched.
Yeah.
You're like, how do you communicate that?
Yeah, yeah.
And yet, when you see that on screen, like, that really kind of comes forward, especially between the two men. There's a lot of tenderness.
Huge amount of tenderness, and something I often think is, whatever about the sex, I think the tenderness is the really distinct thing about the film. It's important to me that tenderness between two men is shown rather than just the physical act, because that to me is much more radical and the thing in the world that people think I often think that people can, certain prejudiced factions of the community can understand, you know, fucking in some ways, but tenderness between two men, I think it's important that we see that.
Did you know Paul before this?
Not as well as I do now.
I can't believe I set you up so well for that.
You walked into that one. I did know Paul. We did a little sketch for Irish Comic Relief, this charity thing, where the priest from FLEABAG took the confession of Marianne and a call from normal people. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I think it might be on the internet if you're so inclined. But yeah, it was this really cool thing that we did. We shot during the pandemic, and Lenny Abramson directed it, and Conor McPherson wrote it. Was sort of extraordinary, sort of highbrow people that we got to work with. It was during, and because it was during the pandemic, a confessional was the only thing that we could get away with, because you're in the same space but not really. So anyway, that's where I met Paul, and then we hung out a little bit, but we've just forged a huge bond. I love him dearly. I think he's the most extraordinary, beautiful actor, and just an amazing colleague. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the two of you kind of finding the right rapport for these characters, especially because you're talking about, there's a lot of stuff you have to chart, a lot of land you have to navigate, because obviously there's the initial encounter, there's the encounter in the elevator, there's the intimate scenes, there's the scenes where he goes back to the house.
Yeah.
How did you guys kind of work this out? Was this just something that kind of gradually happened through rehearsal or on the set?
Yeah, again, I think it's all about mapping it out. We didn't rehearse too much with in any of the iterations of the story. So we shot it in Andrew Haigh's childhood home, which was so extraordinary because, you know, that's where he would have lost his first tooth, and it was just so intimate, and we shot that part of the story first. So it was like having a mini childhood with Jamie and Claire, and then had to say goodbye to them. And every day I kind of knew that it was really special, because you kind of, when something is so well written, you want to be able to honor that and hit those notes, and every day we were like, wow, this is working. And then it was like, okay, now we should go into the other section of the film. So with Paul, I don't know, I think sometimes I think the most successful sets are when everybody wants to be there, everybody loves their part, and you just enjoy the acting of it. Sometimes the most difficult sets are when actors are trying to defend something that, or at least sort of to make a play for authenticity. And you know, when actors are sort of saying, you know, my character wouldn't do that, and you have to advocate for your character the whole time, and none of that sort of, we didn't need to do any of that stuff because Andrew had taken care of it all so well. So we're just really trusted in that, and I love the idea of playing love. It's such a beautiful thing, like particularly having gone through all this, you know, few weeks of pretty heavy stuff. So the idea of just playing lightness and chemistry and falling in love was actually really beautiful, particularly with somebody that I love so much.
Let's go back to that little tidbit you just dropped about filming in Andrew's childhood home.
Yeah.
So Adam's in his 40s, right? Yeah. So this means that you've got to play somebody who's a 40-something man who then goes back to his childhood home and has to revert to what I'm guessing is like 11 or 12, probably?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about figuring out where to kind of place that performance as you're between these two poles, and if actually being in Andrew's home helped you do that.
It really did, actually. It really did. It's so sensual, the film. I feel like everybody has a relationship with their childhood home. That's sort of like, you know, because your home when you're a kid is so, it's just your entire world, isn't it? So that you have a relationship with the bathroom tiles, and I remember once I was playing with something on the wallpaper in the child's bedroom. You know the way in your childhood bedroom you have a relationship with the wall almost, you know what I mean? And just what it's like to sort of sneak into your parents' bedroom or go downstairs when you're not supposed to go downstairs at Christmas. So all that was really helpful. Yeah, to have that.
I don't know about you, I mean, the rare times that I go back, both of my parents are living, when the rare times that I go back to my childhood home, it's amazing how you immediately go back to that space where
Yeah.
suddenly you're 12 or 13, and like you said, like, I remember where that wallpaper was.
Yeah.
Why did you move stuff in the kitchen?
Yeah, yeah.
Even though I haven't lived here in 40 years, like 30 years.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I think that's kind of, there's a, you know, there's something comparative emotionally with that, which is like, I think it's difficult to move on. So one of the big questions was, how do you convey childishness without kind of going too far, you know, without, he's not an actual child, but he, in some ways, can't help himself. He's not used to being in this position. So it's to, that's why I feel like it was kind of physical, to sort of be able to be boyish or childish, and you know, I think that's within us all. Sometimes with our parents, it's very hard to escape those roles, particularly if you want them and you miss them so much.
I love the way that Jamie Bell and Claire Foy play these parents.
Yeah, it's so wonderful, I think.
Yeah, and there's a weird sense of it being kind of period-ish, where you're sort of like, oh yeah, I bet you that's what parents were like, you know, in the 80s, versus them being what seemed, you know, very modern and real and present for him at that point.
Yeah.
I want to talk about two scenes, if you don't mind, both with Claire Foy. The coming out scene and the sequence in the bed,
Yeah.
where you kind of realize suddenly that it's that tight close-up for so long, and then it just kind of pulls back and you realize that.
Yes, yeah. Well, the first scene, what I love about the film is the kind of coexistence of the brutality of families and the deep love of families. And I often think this about queer stories, particularly, that for so many queer people and their families, it's not about full embraced acceptance, or nor is it about outright rejection. It's somewhere in between, you know. There's a kind of path to, hopefully, to acceptance. And your parents can say incredibly cruel things, and they can still love you. They can say awkward, unseeing, pretty brutal things. And particularly in the 1980s, is something that I feel quite strongly about, is that in the 1980s, I remember when we made this movie Pride, I did a lot of research into how gay people were spoken about, particularly in the British press. And it was absolutely, willfully and shamelessly prejudiced. So they said any number of vile, fear-mongering, hateful things about queer people. And so, of course, parents, if their children came out to them, if they're fed this from everywhere, they're going to be fearful. So that really was in existence, and it's got better, but there are still there are new problems now. So I love the idea that quite brutal scene, I suppose it's just extremism in stories. I love the fact that there's a nuance to it.
Well, it seems to be Adam's biggest fear, and the idea that he's able to kind of come back and like almost right wrongs, or have the conversations rather that he wasn't able to have when he was a kid, and he comes out and says, you know, I'm gay, and he gets the exact wrong reaction.
Yeah, well, he doesn't want it to have a coming out scene.
Right.
It's undignified, you know, undignified. And so much of the frustration, I think, for queer people is like, I don't particularly want to have a big thing as a 40-year-old man to try and explain to you the way things have gone, and that your ignorance is your problem.
Yeah.
So I think there's something about the controlled rage in that scene, but also the desperate need for real acceptance from his mother, who he adores. So it's really beautiful. It's a beautiful scene to play, because I think it speaks to a lot of people I know who've had that experience. And so all of that stuff is so. And then you have that scene, like you say, in the bedroom where he goes in the child's pajamas, and you're like, this is kind of weird.
It's weird, it's about to get weirder, yeah.
It's get weirder, and you get in and you're wearing these tiny little pajamas. But there's something about that I don't know, there's the audacity of that I think people understand. You want to do that, and it's just allowing. But we did that scene, and I really adore that scene in the movie. I think it's really genuinely extraordinary. But it was strange because we were in this 1980s kind of creaky bed, and Jamie Bell was asleep. And as the camera sort of focused on me and Claire, he had to sort of slide out of the bed. The whole had to slide into the bed. And so Claire was facing the whole And she was like, sorry, I can't unsee this. But you know, I think sometimes with those things, you know, like having a bit of challenge when you're filming is kind of fun, you know. I did 1917 where we had to do like a continuous take for 7 minutes, so this was nothing.
Yes, it's just bed choreography. It's not a oneer.
Yeah.
I read a number of interviews with Andrew Haigh about the film, and you know, he's talked a lot about filming the childhood thing, why he wanted to write it, the things that he was kind of going through. He's talked about it being, even though his parents are still alive and it's not autofiction, that it's just, you know, a remarkably personal film. And then the thing he said after that was, and it was equally, I would like to think it's equally personal for the cast.
Yeah.
Did you find it a personal film? What was it that, you know, you felt that, what did it unlock in you, I guess? What did it touch in you when you were making this film?
That's a great question. Oh, there's no doubt, I feel so personal. In fact, the first time I saw it was after the strike was over, so I had this opportunity to see it with 300 people in London. I was so overwhelmed by it because I felt like I was just sort of standing there naked, because it's, you know, we can see it's very close, and I kind of didn't want to. I read that, and the fact that a film like this exists, because a film like this would never even have, I wouldn't have got to watch a film like this when I was younger, never mind being in it. And so my real strong instinct when I read this was, I just don't want to act. I don't want to create a backstory that isn't my own. And Andrew had put so much of himself in it, and I felt like I had to just give as much of my own vulnerability or shame or fear or whatever it is, joy into it. I wanted to use my voice and use my clothes and just go, this is unadorned, if you know what I'm saying. So yeah, and then when you see it, you think, wow, Jesus. But so the fact that people, you know, I think that's, it really moves me every time I talk about it, because the fact that I got a chance to play a part that I never thought I would ever to be played, and to turn something that I suffered with for so much, and for that, to turn that into something that's of use to people is completely wonderful.
Thank you.
We've got some time for a few audience questions. I am looking for him. Go right ahead, sir.
Oh, okay. Hi, Andrew.
Hey.
So my question is, having seen so much of Andrew Haigh's films, there's always so much tenderness and vulnerability, and you've spoken about the intimacy of the film, and I'm just wondering how, what the atmosphere is like in terms of Andrew as a director, and how that intersected with how you approach this character.
Yeah.
Let me just make sure everybody heard the question. How is Andrew as a director, and how did that affect how you approach the character?
I'd seen so many of his films before. So when I first spoke to him, I thought he was going to be really serious, auteur. And he really isn't like that at all. And I've actually found out with a lot of the people who can express that sort of side of them. In reality, they wear their art pretty lightly because it's just at his fingertips, I suppose. And so he doesn't need to make everybody aware how extraordinary he is. Yeah, he wore it really lightly. And again, we kept saying to him, is this okay? You know, is this weird being your childhood home? But I felt like he was my comrade. I really feel that. I felt really strangely protective of him. Because imagine doing, you know, talking about all that kind of stuff, and I felt like it needs to be sort of a strange marriage between his experience and mine. So I felt like I just needed to look at him, and if I moved him in some way, then I just felt like I really, really trusted him, because his work isn't sentimental. But I think there's a real difference between emotionality and sentimentality, you know. And in this one, I felt like we mapped out, and to a certain degree, I was like, oh, I don't want to cry, and oh. But then I think he was very protective of me, and I think he looked after me in the edit, because sometimes emotion you can't. It's like holding water, really, literally. So yeah, he's an extraordinary human being as well as a wonderful director.
Hi.
Hey.
Sorry, I'm going to use my theater voice. I'm curious what your connection was to the music in the film, because it's such a prominent part of the film. And I was curious if you were really familiar with what Andrew planned to do with it going in, or if it was music that sort of already had a place in your spirit or in your upbringing.
A personal connection to the music in the film.
Yeah, well, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with the Pet Shop Boys. They're so brilliant. I always find it sort of strange about music that you connect to, like sort of, not to use a cliche, but sort of like queer music. It's so extraordinary the way, before you know fully about yourself, that you connect to something musically. I remember hearing, well, I probably was about 9 or 10, hearing Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive, and thinking, this is the best song. I just couldn't believe how much I loved it. And that was before you have any idea, necessarily who you are. So Pet Shop Boys was completely, always on my mind. I have that. I mean, that version of it. Erasure, another amazing band. And what he's done for The Power of Love, I think, is sort of extraordinary. It's a song that I've always loved, but it does something to me now. The lyrics, I'll keep the vampires from your door. Oh, it's just the lyrics that are so extraordinary. Make love your goal. It's there's so many. There's
Vampires on the screen.
but yeah, I really, and he talks very movingly about it. He was like, I love those songs when I was a kid, and now I have an opportunity to put them in, and I'm gonna fucking do it. It's so lovely. It's so liberating.
I'm seeing a hand right back there. Go right ahead.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. You talked about how when you're playing your characters, you kind of involve your own personal feelings into it. But how do you separate your emotions when you're working from like your day-to-day life, especially with such like a deep and emotional movie?
The $20,000 question. How do you separate your the emotions that you're jigging up on screen for the character from your emotions in everyday life?
Yeah, it's. I just feel like it's such an honor to do it. So yeah, you kind of have to carry around some stuff, and I think the big thing is having a little bit of. The hardest thing I think is the stamina when you have to do a scene, not just in the 5 minutes that it eventually becomes. It's not a 5-minute experience. You have to do that all day, to have that walk around that feeling all day, and then if you have weeks of pretty heavy hitting scenes, you have to be in that space. But I don't know, I feel, it's something I say a lot, but I feel like you have to play a part, you have to be playful. So I feel like it's important for me that actually all the emotions are available to you, no matter what scene you're doing. And the most important thing actually, if you're doing a really heavy scene, is that actually you could laugh. Or when you're doing comedy, can be some soul in it. But that's the way it goes. If you were to take a snapshot of someone on the worst day of their life, I'm not sure that every single shot would be somebody like this. But at the day of someone's funeral, you look. That's what's so wonderful about human beings, is that you look towards the light, even in moments of real desolation. So you kind of want to, like that scene that we did with Claire when Jamie and all were sliding in and out of the bed. I mean, we were fully hysterical. And I love the idea of having that emotion that's there, and then diving off the cliff and just having a completely different emotion. I think it's about your imagination and sense of humor, and not, it's one of the things that I kind of really hope that when people see the film, that it's a sad film, and when you're promoting the film, it becomes like, oh, I believe it's really sad, blah blah. But there's something really cathartic about it, and there's moments of real joy and lightness and hope, I think, and so that's actually the reason why I think the film is so successful, because it's not just painted with one color. I don't know if that answers your question.
Time for one more. Go right ahead.
Hi,
Hey.
I was wondering, after hearing you talk about how personal this role was for you, if there was anything that you learned, like doing this film, that you were surprised by as an actor or as a person?
That's a good question. Is there anything that you learned about yourself while you were doing this role, since it was such a personal film for you?
Well, I guess it's just about the fact. It's not necessary to sound morbid about it, but that we're not here long, and to be able to have that difficult conversation with people, and to love as courageously as possible is really is kind of what should be the goal. I love the very beautiful, very simple premise of what would you say to your parents as an adult, and speak to them for the first time, eye to eye. And I suppose just that vulnerability is the thing that connects us all. I mean, we can say, you know, we live in the Instagram age, and we can say and filter everything and make ourselves look incredibly sexy and powerful, and that impresses people, but it doesn't connect us. Like, when you connect with someone, is when you say, "Oh God, I feel nervous," or "I feel scared," or "I feel," and then someone goes, "Oh my God, I do too," and that, you know, that's how you connect, and that's, to me, the most important thing that I should try to do in my life, is, you know, particularly in this kind of extraordinary industry, which is all about, you know, there's lots of nonsense in the industry. So to make a film like this that feels like it's like a collective experience, I really hope, you know, like, this is so lovely that people are here watching this film together. It's a collective thing, and you know, that's why I think it's important to keep cinemas going, that we're not watching and having all these experiences on our own. You know, we've got to keep it going. And AI can't do that, you know, AI can't do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you
here.
so much.
Thank you.